Refinitiv is once again very proud to sponsor. For those who may not know, Refinitiv is now a part of the LSEG business. Now, our relationship with Reuters and Breakingviews goes back many years. And as a major data provider to the world's financial markets, we are really happy to call Reuters Breakingviews the leading provider of pretty much what people call agenda-setting financial commentary, a very key partner to our business. Personally, it is my daily must-read news source. With that in mind, let me just quickly turn the virtual stage over to Katrina from Reuters and Brian Gu, who is the President and Vice Chairman of Xpeng. I'm sure this will be a fascinating session for all of us. So over to you, Katrina.
Thank you, Alfred. Good morning, or rather good evening, Brian, and welcome to everyone who's joining us for this event, which is part of the annual Breakingviews prediction series, looking to the year ahead in business and finance. I'm Katrina Hamlin, one of our columnists based in Hong Kong, and I cover the electric vehicle industry. I'm here today with the Chinese electric vehicle maker Xpeng's Brian Gu, who is the President and Vice Chairman of the company. Brian, I have a lot of questions for you today, and our audience is also going to have lots of questions, which you're able to send in to us using the Slido tool that you should see on your screens now. But first of all, I noticed that in the first week of this year, Xpeng's share price fell by around 10%. And I think that means that investors have a burning question that we should probably tackle first. On New Year's Eve, the Chinese government said that it will be slashing subsidies for the electric car industry. And I think there's a lot of curiosity around what that is going to do for the industry's sales this year. So, Brian, could you tackle that first for us, please?
Yeah, Katrina, very happy to be on this program. To answer your first question, I think you probably have to look at the EV industry in China in the sort of holistic picture. Subsidy on the retail side has been actually one of the main instruments that government has been using over the years to sort of spur the growth of EV industry. But I think what you've seen in the last 4 or 5 years is that subsidy has not really generated the momentum and the positive growth that government has intended to, because I think you actually developed a number of players that actually aimed at collecting subsidies in China. So I think the government has since shifted its gears, shifting from subsidy-led policy to the infrastructure and support-focused policy to support the EV industry. So what you saw in the last few years is a gradual decrease of subsidies for EV sales in China, and that has been a annual pattern already. So first of all, this year's subsidy decline is totally expected, because I think everyone knows that subsidy is coming down. And second thing is, I think the subsidy now, the amount of subsidy as part of a percentage of the price of the vehicle is much smaller compared to a few years ago. So right now, maybe it's less than 10% of the car price. So the subsidy's impact to car purchases actually is much smaller than before. So what I think is actually driving the significant sales in the last year and the recent months, which probably everyone saw a very strong growth and momentum of EV penetration, is not because of the subsidy levels. It's actually, I think, the development of the overall EV sector, having the right products, attractive features, infrastructure for charging, and additional policies to support the driving of those EVs on the road. Collectively, I think are making the EVs a much stronger value proposition to customers. So I think going forward, I think the subsidy will become a much smaller part of the equation for people's purchase decisions. And more importantly, will be focused on the product itself, the quality, the performance, the smart technology capabilities, and obviously the design and look of the product. So I think that's what I think consumer will be focused on. So subsidy will be less of an issue, I think, going forward.
Well, that said, I've noticed that one of your peers, NIO, is saying that it's actually going to help make up the difference for customers who ordered a car at the end of last year before we heard this news about the latest round of cuts. Is that something that Xpeng is going to be doing as well? And more broadly, do you think that in the short term, a fall in subsidies means that you'll have to add other costs like marketing and so on to help draw people in?
Well, I think we see the subsidy reduction is part of the overall cost of doing business. So whether that is something that we pass through to customers, or that's something that OEM absorb for themselves to market the vehicle, it's all, I think, the individual companies' decision policies. I think you saw a number of companies have announced that they're going to increase the price to respond to subsidy reductions. We were actually also one of those companies because the strength of our product in the consumer market. And there are others probably will take advantage of this reduction to promote and additional marketing programs. So it's effectively a promotion on your product if you are protecting your price. So I think ultimately it's a total cost of marketing your product.
Okay. So nonetheless, a cost of some sort, and obviously there's a lot of other costs on your plate. You guys, for example, are extremely committed to R&D. You've made sure that you invest a substantial amount of that in that year on year. So I'm sure a lot of people on this call will be very interested in hearing what sort of trends you see in the year ahead in terms of capital raisings to cover these costs and other costs.
Well, I won't be commenting on our own company, given the nature of this conversation, but I would say a few points. For EV and also smart EV, for that matter. What I mean smart EV is people committed to the R&D on the smartification, which includes smart cockpits, autonomous driving, and other smart capabilities. That investment is a long-term commitment because you need a consistent long-term investment for developing your technology. At the same time, you need to build the infrastructure on the factories, on the charging network, on your product offering, the models. So there's a significant amount of investment. So I think, I would expect the level of investment in EV continue to be very strong. And the need for access for capital is also very important. So I think the top players who has a very strong market positions and access to capital will have advantages over the smaller or weaker players who probably will struggle to get the capital to invest for their business and R&D. So I think that will become one of the core differences with the winners and the losers. So I think access to capital is a very important one.
And obviously, investors have been really excited about the electric vehicle theme very broadly in the markets in the last couple of years. You mentioned the autonomous driving theme as well. Do you think that that's going to become, an investment fad or theme in its own right in the year ahead?
Well, I think autonomous driving is a very big topic. Obviously, there's different type of autonomous driving research going on. They obviously the robo-taxi and the level 4 autonomous driving that people has pour a lot of dollars into, and mostly driven by software companies who are actually trying to come up with software-only solutions. We think that will probably be a little far out in terms of commercialization. So our focus on the autonomous driving R&D is on what we can actually deploy on our production vehicle, which we are selling or which we will be introducing very soon. So right now, the regulation in China and I think around the world is allowing a high level of, I would say, assisted driving, that because you still require individual to sit behind the wheel to take over control, because that's what regulation demands. But we are trying to make sure the car has enough capabilities that it can drive in most of scenarios on its own. So when a person can actually be much more relaxed and enjoy the driving and be productive in the time they spend inside the vehicle. So I think there's a two different type approach here. So for us, I think that is a very important aspect of your technology because it will drastically change the way that you spend time inside your vehicle. Instead of staring at the road, constantly and without interruption, you may be able to relax a little bit, and that the productivity and enjoyment and comfort will become very, very significant as the technology become more prevalent and more capable. So I think the current ADAS, what we call the high degree of ADAS, that allows highway NGP already, which is the point-to-point driving on highway, really using the vehicle itself. We think we can use our technology to expand to more city-like scenarios, and that's our goal. But whether it will become the level 4 or the robotaxi like scenarios, I think they will take many years because one is regulation that's not currently allowed. Two, I think technology still needs a long time to prove out.
I thought there were some pilot schemes for robotaxis already in the works in China. Is that something Xpeng's been able to be part of at all?
Well, I think pilots are everywhere. And the Chinese government loves to have set up pilot zones in every district they can think of to demonstrate the capabilities. But the regulation right now is not opening the framework for commercialization of these services. At the same time, I think no one has claimed that they are fully commercially capable. So I think that step will take probably several years at least to materialize.
I think it's obvious to anyone listening to you now and anyone who's kind of followed your story over the last few years that the autonomous driving part of this, the smart part of EV, is really important to Xpeng and the value proposition for your products. And unlike a lot of other companies, you tended to do a lot yourself rather than working with partners. And that I see the merits there, but given the limits of commercialization at the moment, it's also arguably quite an expensive approach to doing things. Can you speak a little bit about why you made the decision to take that kind of strategy and how that strategy might evolve in the next few years?
Well, first of all, I want to say is we don't do everything ourselves. As a car company, that you need to work with your suppliers, your partners. There's a lot of mature, great suppliers that you work with that has been, working producing car parts historically. So there's no need to do everything yourself. The parts that we think it's very, very important to do yourself is the technology that truly differentiates. What I mean technology is the smartification, the software, the full stack capability that we use on our autonomous driving capabilities, our smart cabin capabilities, our electric platform, our charging platform. I mean, some of the very high value added technologies we want to own ourselves, particularly on the autonomous driving, which we're producing high degree of assisted driving capability now. If you're using third-party solutions, using a lot of things from your suppliers, it's very hard to really innovate quickly. And also it's very difficult to differentiate from the other players in the industry. So that's why we, from very beginning, even as a small company, we set out on a full stack software sort of approach. And now I think that approach has been recognized by the market as probably the right approach if you want to build a leading sort of technology platform and autonomous driving ADAS capability. And also we saw now in China and probably other parts of the world, OEM companies are now changing towards our approach. They used to use solutions like holistic solutions provided by suppliers, but now they want to develop full stack in-house because exactly the reason I just mentioned, you want to control your destiny and you want to control your innovation.
I remember when we first started following some of the pure electric vehicle companies, particularly in China, where there were a lot of these companies just a few years ago. I think the number was in the hundreds. We said that the technology in some ways seems simpler and perhaps there was a lower bar to entry. But I think listening to you now and thinking about how smart these cars are becoming, that's probably no longer the case. Is that right?
Well, I think a lot of the companies think, yes, they can just add a function into their car, just like the traditional OEMs. So we have a ADAS function, check the box. But where'd that come from? It come from maybe a Bosch, maybe come from Mobileye if they want a more advanced and sexy and cooler solution. But those things they don't need to do themselves. So they just feel like, okay, we put it on our vehicle and we can sell to the customers that we have these functions. You see, we can auto park, we can do, semi-autonomous driving, we can do this and that. But at the end of the day, those are not your features and those are not your capabilities. And as a company, as a smart EV company, you need to really evolve quickly to make sure that you lead the way on those technologies rather than just taking whatever people can give you and you have no way to innovate and to evolve. So I think those approaches now has been abandoned for a lot of the top companies now. I think they are now choosing to do the full stack themselves, which we saw in recent announcements by all these companies.
Now, the other sort of big development that is coming up on the horizon for you guys is your expansion beyond China. And before I ask more about that, I had a question on the expansion related to the autonomous driving. I wondered, how hard is it to start in one market like China, to master the software, have the algorithms working for that environment, and then to switch over to another completely different place with very different, roads and systems and so on. And then, adding in the data part of the puzzle with the various data laws in different regions. Is that, the biggest challenge or one of the biggest challenges that you face as you go beyond China? How does that sort of factor in on the list of things you have to figure out?
Well, I think it is not easy to go outside of China to become a global brand. And you saw the challenges faced by a lot of the Chinese companies already in different parts of the world. And in a sophisticated market like Europe, I think there are a lot of the existing players that we need to compete with to build a brand for ourselves. So brand building is not easy. You need to convince the consumers that there's a brand like Xpeng coming to Europe and the product is cool and really good technology. It takes time to educate them. So I think it is definitely an investment that we need to do. But you also need to recognize the potential on why you do this, because as a leading player, with the technology in-house and beautiful products you can design and manufacture, you don't want to just be a China-only player. You don't want to cap your potential just being the Chinese market. The global market is many times bigger than the Chinese market, and also you're really looking for cool, very high quality products. And I think the consumer demand to see more. We feel like by doing comparison of our product with what's offered in Europe and other parts of the world, we think we have a very competitive product offering that we can actually attract customers there. So I think there's a huge potential. And as a company, we need to make sure we are capable of tapping into that potential. The challenges, in addition to the brand you mentioned, also requires we need to really build infrastructure to sell and to service on the ground. That also takes time and need to be very local, develop local relationships with the country, depends on the nature of the markets there. And also on the technology front, we certainly, will have to invest in doing a lot of the testing, a lot of the localization for our technologies. That's investment we have to make over time. Like I said, it's clearly not like you can just replicate what you do in China, but a lot of the foundation of the technology is still the same. It's still have the infrastructure, the architecture, the algorithm, the package that we put on the vehicle. But to make sure it's compliant and to make sure it works well in the foreign international markets, we need to test extensively in those markets if we offer those services. So those are things that we can cut corners. So as a company, I think we see big potential internationally. And we see our product be exciting offerings to the customers there. But it is a long road, and we are willing to make the investment and willing to put in the time and the infrastructure to make it work.
So sometimes when companies move into different markets, their branding or their brand positioning is slightly different to what it would be back at home. I noticed that often with Western brands coming in this direction towards Asia. Can you talk to us a little bit about what your brand position is going to be in the European market, maybe compared to Tesla or some of those other names that the audience will be very familiar with?
Well, I think we has always emphasized on the product to be a smart product. We are not simply introducing an EV. We think our product not only just beautifully designed, but has probably one of the most sophisticated smart capabilities one can have in an EV. So that's clearly something that we want to make sure the customers understand they're getting one of the smartest vehicles on the road. Secondly is that the product we typically in China are focused on young, upscale, sort of tech savvy customers. And those are ones that are willing to try new features, willing to really be excited about, the different, sort of technology enabled scenarios that we can offer inside the vehicle. Our vehicle can be used very differently and will be it's almost like exploration, what you can do with that vehicle. It's hugely exciting. So we want to make sure the product generates the same excitement that we have generated in China to make, we are the leading, sort of electric vehicle companies. If you look at all the BEV companies, we're probably the best selling right now in terms of delivery last year. And we want to, make sure that the customers understand that they're getting the best products from China.
Mm. So that all makes sense to me when it comes to the hardware, the actual car. But I'm wondering if there's going to be major changes in terms of the sort of services you can offer, given the higher costs that would come with recruiting and employing people in that part of the world. Also localizing the technology. Even things like the partnerships that you have for your infotainment, I imagine that has to be extremely different once you leave China. So can you sort of tell us a little bit more about how these kind of nuances will be different in a new market?
Yeah, I think first of all, we need to set up our sales and services infrastructure based on what's available locally. We are developing relationships with leading sort of service providers in each of the countries that we want to operate. We also want to maintain our own presence. So we're exploring various number of models in different countries, and also in terms of the service providers that we work with, we would definitely have to work with local service providers for content, for mapping, for music, for charging infrastructure, the adoption. So those things we have to do to make sure we offer a very competitive product locally.
And what's that been like in Europe? Is there any sense that it's not as advanced as what's on offer in China? Has it been difficult from that perspective? Because obviously China is very far ahead with many of the aspects of these technologies.
Well, I think so far, like I said, it's still in the early days. We only started in Norway last year. It was a very, very small scale. And we started to just introduce our P7, our second product, which is one of the best-selling product in China, probably towards the end of last year. So we are looking at significant progresses, but still it's small scale. Like I said, we view this as an investment you have to make over a long period of time, and also to make sure that we really understand the local needs and local market before we decide on the specific approach for the European market.
Okay, that's very exciting. All right, so we touched on a number of the challenges there, but there's one that we didn't talk about. I'm sitting here in Hong Kong, and I'm very conscious of the fact that Hong Kong and also China has some of the strictest restrictions in the world right now when it comes to traveling. We have a very long quarantine, for example. And I was just wondering, for a company like yours, which is based in China, but it listed overseas and doing lots of interesting things around the world, how difficult has it been to cope with the COVID travel restrictions and particularly those around Greater China?
Well, I think, the quarantine restrictions are a nuance for sure. I mean, I have quarantined about 6 times already, and I'm looking towards my 7th time quarantine very soon. Yes, I mean, it will take up a lot of your personal time. But as a company, you need to adjust to the way of working in a COVID environment. Just give you an example, we did our US IPO, we did our Hong Kong IPO, we did our US follow-on, all without seeing anybody. I mean, we actually did all the deals in a conference room and did video conferences with all the investors around the world. And we did it very successfully. So I think as a company, you just need to adapt to new ways of working. And those are challenges you have to overcome. I don't think you have any excuses for not doing things because it's COVID restrictions on travel. There are also business-related, challenges when, obviously in China, if there's COVID and there's certain businesses become impacted and local, shutdown and stuff. But you just have to work through that. We obviously hope for not major disruption to our operations or factories or R&D. But we faced, so our suppliers, had some issues with COVID-related shutdown. Even our international supplier in other countries being impacted by COVID. All these are actually things as a company you have to overcome. So I think what we learned in the last 2 years is yes, it's a different world. It's much more, I would say, restrictive world for free flowing, merchandise and people. But at the same time, as a company, you cannot miss a beat. You just have to, figure out a way to get it done. And I think so far we have done well coping with the situation.
So you haven't had to change any plans or, the time frame for any of your plans?
I think we have achieved, the business plan that we have set out, in each of the years under COVID, which I think is quite rather remarkable. And also, I think as a company, you have to be always preparing for alternatives. For example, if we talk about suppliers, we worry about supplier being impacted, then we develop 2 to 3 alternative suppliers in case one get impacted. You just have to put in a lot more work and a lot more effort to make sure that things will continue.
Speaking of suppliers, chip supply has obviously been a big theme for this industry in recent months, and you don't seem to have been too badly hurt by the chip shortages. Can you tell us a little bit about how you manage that and what you expect to see in terms of chip supply in the year ahead?
Well, I think no one escapes the chip shortage or the supply chain shortage on chips. It's an industry-wide, problem. And all I can say is that we just have been very, very focused and very nimble on, trying to deal with the issues. It does, have an impact on our business. And I think it impacted every other car company. Nobody can be an exception there. I think everyone's coping with it to the maximum capability they have. As a company right now, we're still not, so big that we have to find 1 million parts every month for the production. I think that would be impossible. But for finding 10,000 parts for a month, maybe we can figure out a way to be nimble around it. And also, I think it is something that will last for well into this year. I think it is something that as a company just have to learn how to deal with it. And like I said, do a lot of work on making sure you have good backup suppliers, to make sure you have alternative sources, to make sure you have technologies that allows you to be, to have more access to players. You just need to do all kinds of work to make sure you're as safe as you can.
What are the other big changes or developments coming up in terms of supply chain in the year ahead? Like, do you foresee any other kinks in the supply chain making headlines for the auto industry? And conversely as well, are there any bright spots in your supply chain where you can see that the costs are going to be falling quite a lot in the near future?
Well, I think supply chain for the industry will continue to be something that everyone will be focused on. But most part of the supply chain is okay. I think China has one of the best suppliers for this industry, and also at a very competitive cost. So we have actually good advantage to be operating in China because most of the parts or suppliers can be locally located and manufacturing. I think obviously we are obviously constantly worry about disruption and logistics, given the COVID restrictions and the trade environment, and inefficiency caused by COVID measures. So that will have an impact on the supply chain in the near term. Some of the semiconductor shortage will linger on for a while, I think, this year. And I think there's also for industry need to focus on commodity prices and some natural resource prices, whether that will have impact on the supply chain, given the overall environment. But I think the bright spot is that I think things will get better rather than get worse. That's my prediction for this year. I think it will probably be still something with the challenge faced by everybody in the industry. But I think as the year goes on, I think you'll see the crisis on the supply chain become much more manageable, and I think that will be a silver lining there.
Okay, well, just one more question on the whole COVID aspect of things then. We've had a couple of years of this, and I don't know how many more years of these restrictions we're facing, particularly in this part of the world where everyone's very careful. I was just wondering, thinking about Hong Kong's role for capital raisings for this industry, how do you think that might change or develop over the next couple of years if Hong Kong continues to be as isolated as it is with these very, very strict regulations? Do you think companies like Xpeng, who previously come here to list, you're here for a dual listing, would look elsewhere or think about doing things differently?
Well, first of all, I don't want to comment on Hong Kong generally because it's such a complicated topic. But we are very happy to be listed in Hong Kong. I think it is a natural move for Xpeng to have dual listing status. And I think during the process, which is under COVID environment, we have had tremendous amount of support from all aspects of the Hong Kong financial markets. So far, I think our experience in Hong Kong has been very positive, and I believe it is the right move for us to be here. So yeah, that's all I can say.
Well, looking to elsewhere in the world then, we've spoken about the European markets. I'd love to know what you think about the US market as a possibility for Xpeng in the future. And, are there markets beyond that would make sense for your next steps as you expand beyond China and Europe?
Well, I think the international market opportunity does not stop at Europe, right? I mean, if you are, want to be an international player, you have to look at other markets. So we will be looking to additional markets. Again, I think that will take time. It's not something you want to jump in and do right away. As many markets. As a young company, we don't want to be distracted, but we want to focus on the opportunity. US is a big market, but it probably need to wait a little bit before we have the resources and focus to do it.
Yeah, I'm laughing a little bit as you answer that because what you're saying sounds very sensible, and yet some companies are jumping in, or at least talking about jumping in. So I guess there's a balance to be struck there, because if you wait too long, you lose that first mover advantage, right? So when you say you need to be careful and not move too quickly, what are you thinking in terms of time frame? What's the sort of the big picture?
Well, I think as a company, you want to really go into the market when the market is seeing the inflection point coming. Because if you go in too early with very little penetration, very little infrastructure to support EV, you're not going to move as a company. So we will obviously want to focus on countries that have good infrastructure, good policy, good user preference for EVs already. So we actually can offer a product, and so we don't need to educate a different country, why you want to use EV, right? So I think we will evaluate the country opportunities one by one to see whether it is the right time to enter those markets. But we don't want to be entering a market that does not have the infrastructure to support EV and does not have the consumer awareness for EV products, and the penetration is very, very low. then we think that would be a waste of time for us.
Yeah, I mean, clearly you wouldn't enter a market where there was really no infrastructure, but what are the inflection points that help you to identify when the time is right then? I mean, how would you sort of quantify or qualify that a little bit?
Well, I think, if you look at the technology in the past, maybe smartphones or others, I think inflection points typically happen around 10% of market penetration. For example, 10% when 10% of the smartphone, the phone sales become smartphones, it took off really quickly. And then just in China, when we reach 10% in EVs, then it's a quick shoot towards 20%. So I think there is an inflection point at probably around 10% for a market. That's because at that time, the consumers who are really well educated, they actually doesn't worry about EV as a product to buy, and they have friends who are buying it. They can say, okay, I'm happy, I'm comfortable that these are the right choices. I don't need to second guess myself. So I think there is an inflection point when you get a critical mass of products and consumers.
And looking around at other parts of Asia, I don't think there's a lot of places that have reached your inflection points yet, but are there particular markets in Southeast Asia, for example, that you think might, in the sort of, I don't know, near to midterm, become an interesting place for an electric vehicle company to look around?
Well, I think there certainly are interesting markets, and we'll be watching their growth and also the EV penetration growth and infrastructure build-out growth to see whether it's time to start thinking and developing our presence. But I think at the moment, I think right now we're just studying it. Yeah.
What about electric vehicle brands from those other markets? We're starting to see a few names emerge.
You mean local brands in Southeast Asia or?
Yeah.
I think so far we have not seen a company that's trying to do exactly what we're trying to do in China. And clearly we're trying to build something, not just an EV. And that's why Xpeng is focused on the R&D part. And if we are doing a just traditional electric vehicle electric powered vehicle, that probably is not as exciting as what we want to see our product become used differently.
Okay. And I wondered as well what you make of the traditional automakers who are trying to do a lot more in this space. Just in the last few weeks, I've seen some big names announcing tens of billions of investment to expand their electric vehicle offerings. How do you kind of look at them as competitors? What do you think the strengths and weaknesses are for a traditional automaker entering this space versus a dedicated EV maker like yourselves?
No, I think the traditional OEMs have tremendous amount of resources. I mean, they have infrastructure, they have the funding, they have access to capital, they have the manufacturing capabilities and network, but what they lack is actually, I think, the ability to really develop different products, software-defined products. That's something I think OEM is trying to catch up. I think it takes time. I mean, I think obviously OEM has been really, really focused on building EV presence. Some of the larger OEMs already are putting out targets for huge targets, and also putting out roadmap to 100% EV in a few years. So I think those are large commitments people have made. But so far, I think we need to see whether they can actually really have the technology and software capabilities to really make different products that is truly innovative. That's something I think the pure electric companies probably be more nimble, and because the DNA people came from different industries, can actually be able to think more creatively for those changes. So I think both sides has advantages, but I think if you want to look to the future, to what the product is going to be and how innovative and creative electric mobility solutions going to be, I would say you need probably more outside thinking than focus on just traditional OEMs.
I guess that means there's going to be a very competitive market for talent in the near future. How will you cope with that? I'm imagining it's going to be very difficult to find, not only the engineers that you need, but also, the executives that have worked in similar markets with similar products.
The war for talent is huge, given what we're focused on and everybody else is trying to focus on. I think it is also goes to the roots of the company. What you think are the critical pieces that you want to hire the best people for. We clearly think that's in the R&D areas. We clearly think these are in the areas that really define what the future is going to be for us. So I think, and also because our positioning and our current leadership position in these areas, I think we actually are attracting people to our organization for these capabilities. So I think it is a mutual sort of attraction that hopefully can get us slightly ahead of the sort of talent battle curves.
All right. Well, we're going to turn this over to the audience soon for audience Q&A. But before we do that, I wanted to ask you about flying cars. I saw that you guys have some pretty exciting things planned in the year ahead, potentially test flights for an Xpeng flying car. And the press release that I saw described these as not just flying cars, but real flying cars. I'd love you to tell us a little bit more about what's meant by that, and also how that fits into your broader business model as a group.
Well, first of all, I think Xpeng want to be positioning ourselves as a leader exploring all kinds of mobility solutions, not just on a vehicle. So I think we are trying to create an ecosystem that really utilizes our core competencies, which are the electric powertrain, the smart capabilities, the sensing, the autonomous driving, autonomous flying, or like sensing capabilities, and lightweight technology, etc., to build an ecosystem of different flying mobility solutions, different mobility solutions. So flying car is actually currently developed by one of our affiliate companies. It's not by Xpeng ourselves. It's a company that we have invested in as a minority investor, but it shares a lot of the technology platforms with Xpeng. It is actually trying to develop a product that positions itself still as a vehicle, but with ability to fly. We think that will probably be the right sort of product to attract consumer attention. Because if you're just selling a flying device, for example, human flying device, who's going to buy it? It's not something that every family want to own one, just put it in their house. But if there's a car that actually can be driven, let's say on a daily basis, just like a cool sports car, and that's an electric power sports car, and it can also fly for a small range, I think that would be very appealing, especially considering that the regulation is probably not going to in the near term allow flying over large urban areas. It's still, I think, with the closed airspace, especially in China. But I think there will be spaces on outskirts of the cities or in inter provinces that actually allow you to fly or test low altitude flying. And that's where the product can be used and to demonstrate and experienced. So the product that we're trying to develop, hopefully by the end of 2024, we have the consumer version out, is that something that we can use to drive, but there are chances you can actually fly and then really experience the flying capabilities. And we think that's going to be one of the future, because I think the low altitude flying will be actually a critical component of the mobility economy in the future. And we want to be the pioneer right now.
Do you think China is going to be the market where that is pioneered first?
Well, I think the product, we actually debated, the product could be very suitable for maybe, starting in the international markets because there's more relaxed some regulations. But I think in China, the advantage is that there are a lot of test zones the government putting out in different provinces. And I think because the first product is still going to be very much like a car you can drive, EV like you drive. So the ability to fly will be very appealing, but it's not going to be the main reason people buy that product. And also, we want to keep the price affordable. So I think that will probably likely to be the scenario that we have for the first model.
All right, great. Now, I can see questions flying all over my various screens. And so can I urge everyone to use the Slido tool if you've got questions to send me? That will give me the best chance of tackling all of them or the best of them. Let's turn to those now and see what the audience has come up with. Okay, first one. Okay, so we touched on this earlier, but in terms of autonomous driving and software, you want to develop solutions internally. Is it a problem if every manufacturer does this? Why not use open source? How would you respond to that?
Well, I think they are third-party autonomous driving solution providers like Mobileye, like Bosch, like others trying to develop that. And I don't think we currently don't see them as offering compelling products for our vehicles because we feel like in order to have really the best in class technology, you need to really understand the hardware and the software together and know how to operate that in a production vehicle. So that capability can only be had by the company itself rather than rely on outside service providers. In the long run, whether there will be potential for some of the low-end solutions to be offered by a third party, that could be possible. But I think for a company that focused on providing the leading technology and solutions, I think currently we think having the capability in-house, that understanding the hardware and the software and the operating capabilities is important to produce the best solutions.
This question about to what extent different companies collaborate and to what extent they go it alone is definitely one that people are interested in. I have another question here asking, what do you think of the industry consortium MIH, which was initiated by Foxconn? So I believe that's collaborating not only on software, but also the hardware. What do you think about that? Is that something that could work despite your obvious commitment to
well, we are, like I said, we're not doing everything ourselves. We have a great group of partners that we work with. For example, autonomous driving, the chips that we work with NVIDIA, they supply us with their latest AI autonomous driving chips. We work with Qualcomm, our smart cabin, chipsets. We work with sensors that produce LiDAR, produces camera. So we work with them. It's not like we're not working with our top-notch suppliers. But the architect of putting that in your vehicle, the design, the algorithm that we come up with, and the way that we customize our cars, that's something that we want to own in-house. It doesn't mean that we want to make everything ourselves. We don't want to make, fender benders. So we don't want to make, steering wheels. I mean, we have good suppliers for that, but they are core parts of the vehicle that we want to own ourselves.
Well, the other challenge that comes with all of these changes in both the hardware and the software is, how does the insurance industry deal with that? Do you have any thoughts on how the insurance industry could evolve to handle all of these changes, especially around the software?
Well, that's why the regulation currently is not, changing or redirecting the liability to different, so the person still sitting inside the vehicle will be responsible for the vehicle. So I think it will take, that's what I'm saying, the regulation will take a while before, including in insurance agencies to really understand where the liability is, if it's in the, robo-taxi or no human driver scenarios. and what how do you define liability and who takes over at that time. So I think that those are things that needs to be solved before we actually have commercial operations on the road.
And what role does Xpeng and companies like Xpeng have to play in, helping to develop that regulation? How actively are you speaking to regulators and suggesting ideas and sort of thing?
No, I think we have a dialogue with insurance providers, a dialogue with, I would say, regulators in different aspects. It is an area that I think still are not very clear to both the regulators and to the players, because it's evolving so quickly. And I think there's a fundamental framework needs to be really understood before I think specific rules can be introduced. So I think that'll take time to play out, but we constantly talk to the players involved in that process.
Someone in the audience is asking you for a prediction, which seems appropriate given the nature of this series. They're asking if you think that the world will be able to achieve the growing consensus that we should hit 100% electric vehicle sales, zero emissions electric vehicle sales by 2035. A little bit away, but what do you think?
Well, first of all, I think it will be very close, but there will always be a long tail. I mean, the world 100%. I mean, there will always be a long tail in some countries, some parts that there's no infrastructure or there has been a slow adoption. But by and large, I think most of the major market you focus on is going to be all electric.
Another kind of futuristic one. We're hearing a little bit about electric car makers getting involved in the metaverse. How involved will Xpeng be in this space? Do you have any plans?
Well, it's a very intriguing place to be, metaverse. I haven't been there yet, so I'd love to take a tour. But we do have teams that really think about that. In fact, we have registered trademarks that could be used in metaverse scenarios. But I think it's still early, and I think we still need to understand what it can do, and as a company, what is the most appropriate way to be involved. So it's actually we are studying it.
Can you share with us what any of those sort of hypothetical metaverse scenarios might be?
It's just too much on my mind. I think it's not something I want to describe specifically.
Okay. Yeah. We'll just have to wait and see then. All right, a little bit more down to earth. What are your views on the battery swapping market and its growth in China?
Well, I think it's an interesting concept, and I think, but it will require a lot of resources because it's not easy, to build those stations. Not easy to warehouse those batteries. All the cars need to have the same format, which is not currently the case. If there's no scale, it's very difficult to see that become an efficient way of charging. So we still believe in the most efficient charging is supercharging network that you can plug in and charge, especially for the customers that we talk to. To them, having the most convenient, the closest, and the highest density solutions will be the easiest. And people are started to developing driving habits that allows them to use charging network more efficiently. So I think that's what we think will be the most likely, industry outcomes.
And would you expect that Xpeng and companies like Xpeng have to be pretty hands-on and involved in developing that network of chargers, or do you imagine that it's going to be something like the petrol infrastructure now, where you have companies that run gasoline stations, and they're certainly not necessarily the companies making the cars?
Well, Xpeng is already building our own network of supercharging stations. So we actually have built about 600 of those charging stations in China, and we also covered pretty much all the municipal level areas in China. So essentially, the entire China we have coverage for our charging stations.
Do you see that?
Those are the two things we do differently. We only focus on supercharging, so which that utilizes fast charging technologies that we develop. So we want to offer a superior experience to our customers. We also actually have our vehicles that's able to charge in any of the third-party charging networks too. There's hundreds of thousands of those charging stations. So this is a network we feel like that can give our customers a superior experience and better access to charging technology. At the same time, it's not the only charging solution our drivers can have. They can actually charge in hundreds of thousands of different stations.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, in the longer term, do you see Xpeng's involvement in that space as a sort of a bridging thing to help build up the infrastructure in the near term, or do you actually intend to stay involved in that area in the longer term as well, even after there's a much more robust network established by governments, private companies, and so on?
Well, I think we'll probably be in that area for a while because so far the feedback we hear is that the government or the third-party solutions are not really producing good user experience. A lot of them are slow charging stations. A lot of those are poorly managed. The charging piles are not functional. The APP are very difficult to use. Some of the parking spaces are occupied. People don't have the confidence that they can get charged efficiently and comfortably in those areas. So having your own charging network will alleviate some of those concerns. But you're right. I mean, obviously the infrastructure are upgrading as we speak, and it will become more and more dense. And at some point, I think we need to think about what's the role of our supercharging network. But so far, it's providing a superior experience.
So when we speak about you moving into markets beyond China, are you guys anticipating that you'll need to help build up the supercharging network in those markets as well, much as you've done at home?
Well, that's something we don't have an answer for yet. Right now, obviously, given the small number we have in Europe, we're not building our own network yet. But obviously, when we reach a critical mass, whether we should partner or build, those questions need to be answered then.
Okay. All right. Well, we're getting towards the end here, but I think we have time for a couple more questions. So I have a question about whether you would consider expansion into other areas. Would you consider expanding into virtual reality, robotics, medical tech, anything of that nature? What have you got on your plate beyond flying cars?
Well, first of all, we want to be exploring mobility solutions and leveraging our capabilities and platform. So those two are important. We don't want to just be all over the place. And we don't want to be in areas that's not core or relevant to our technology or our mission. But we, for example, we do have an effort, working with robotic companies, just like the flying car company. We actually also have an affiliate company that's trying to develop four-leg robotic models, and that's still early in its R&D phase. But we think that will be also synergistic to our mobility solution ecosystem because it utilizes same. The motors, same battery solutions, same the autonomous sensing and algorithms for the robots. So I think those are things that we will explore, and we have to really find correlations that really make this into the core mission that we want to build, which is exploring mobility solutions using technology.
I think this is going to be our last question. It's a good one. Now, a lot of people talk about electric cars as clean cars, but obviously you're only as green as the grid that you're plugged into. Do you think that the grids in China and elsewhere are greening fast enough?
Well, I think it's a very good question that's being asked from the very beginning of the industry. Clearly we use electricity. So at the user scenario, there's zero emission. So in the cities you drive, it produces no carbon emission, which I think is very important because the density of carbon emission is in urban areas, and we help to reduce that density dramatically if we actually have enough electric vehicle on the road. The second thing is that the electricity come from different sources. Obviously, in China, it depends on which region that you live in. Some of those are probably water or hydro-based. Some of those may be coal-based. Some of those are wind-based. But I think that one trend is very clear: is that renewable energy as a percentage of the overall electric grid production is on the rise for decades. It's now double digits, and it's rising pretty fast. So I think it also gives you the confidence that the more that you use electricity, the more you can actually leverage the clean sort of the shift towards clean energy that's mandated by the Chinese government. And then the third thing is that I think for a company that's focused on EV, we also want to make sure that our the production, our users, the full life cycle, that we have as much green consideration as possible. That's why we actually have produced our first ESG report to the market around summer last year, and we actually really painted the pictures of what we are doing to really make sure that we actually focus on the environment and clean energy. And I think what we are quite happy is that the market recognized that, and we actually now rated by MSCI as a AA for ESG, which is probably the highest rating for any auto companies in the world. We actually were much higher than Tesla. So in a way that we are doing a lot, but I think the question is that I would say a definite yes if you think about EV as whether it'll be cleaner and greener to use compared to traditional automobiles. I think that the answer is definitely yes.
Well, I think you've been very generous with your time this morning. We've actually run a little bit over, so let's wrap it up there. Thank you so much for joining us. And I look forward to hearing more about flying cars and the metaverse and everything else that you get up to in the year ahead.
Thank you, Katrina. Very nice to be on the show. Thank you.
Take care.